Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 29 of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of normal people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn some valuable lessons from their lives, lessons you can apply to become the best leader you were created to be. When you become an intentional leader, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I'm an executive coach, business owner, author, and speaker. Thank you for joining us today. Today, it is my privilege to announce our guest is Debra Boggs. Debra is the founder and CEO of D&S Executive Career Management. She is an expert in executive job search and board candidate best practices. And I'm excited to have her on here today because this board piece is a common question for us. Debra, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for your time. So I know you're familiar with our show a little bit. You've heard a few episodes, and we begin every episode just kind of hearing your career path and how you've moved on through and really to get to this point of being a founder and taking that big jump to be the entrepreneur and having your own business. But tell us about your journey and the leadership lessons along the way.
Oh, wow. Yeah, happy to. I think like a lot of people, maybe a lot of your listeners, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I meandered through several things, I think, early. It took me a while to nail down really where my passion was. I was a first-generation college student, first white-collar worker, professional in my family, and so I didn't know what the opportunities were and what the options were. So finished college, kind of meandered through a few jobs, worked at a marketing company, worked in higher ed, did fundraising, did alumni relations, and I liked a lot of things, but then I got what I thought was my dream job. I got what I thought was really going to be the thing that was perfect for me and my skills, and that was to lead career services for a university.
Nice.
And I loved it. I thought, I am here. I have made it. This is the absolute top of where I could be. And I learned during that time that what I really loved and what really gave me a lot of energy was working with candidates, because that university worked with a lot of like returning alumni and not necessarily all just students. But I loved working with returning alumni on their resumes, their job search strategy, getting them confident about the search, giving them the confidence and the tools they needed to go for stretch roles and really get, more than they thought they could. And so I just really, that gave me a lot of energy. And so I kept doing it on the side. When that role ended, I was vice president of business development for an online training company. That was a great job, but I really was getting a lot of like creative energy from working with job seekers and their resumes and things like that. So I started as a freelance kind of side gig, side hustle.
Yeah. And
then I tell people there's a much longer story, but it snowballed and took over my life, and here we are.
Exactly. Yeah, I understand that. And that's happening a lot with people where the side hustle becomes the hustle. That's our story here. This is my side hustle for 5 years with Reenergize Professional Coaching. Now it's been the hustle for almost 8 years. So talk a little bit about what you're doing with your company and really just, I know it just was a side hustle that became a gig, but what was that point in time where you're like, it's time. I'm going to flip that switch and go from the side hustle to the hustle?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely great question. So I started the side hustle about 8 years ago. And when I quickly got this book of business, I had referrals, things were coming in, and I had young kids at the time. My husband's a stay-at-home dad, thank goodness, because I don't think I could have done the side hustle and the full-time job at the same time, and have I think 1 and 4-year-old at the time when I first started this. But I was really focused on, doing quality work, delivering what I said I was going to do. And I didn't realize that, especially in the freelance world, that those were kind of unique traits. And so I got a great book of business, and it got to the point where I thought I wasn't making full-time income yet. And I think a lot of people with a side hustle wait till it replaces their full-time income, but it couldn't, because I thought, what can this be if I could focus full-time on it? If I could really focus my passion in the space, energy in the marketing, all of those things to really grow it. And so we decided to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and go for it. A little bit before we were ready, but it was one of those things we had, solid work, but it didn't replace my full-time income at that point, but we did it. I say we, because my husband was really helpful in the early days. I replaced him during COVID in the business. But it was great. It was one of those leap of faith, and it delivered. And I think about now all of the other times in my business I've had to kind of take that leap of faith before I was ready, that really we were able to deliver on. And really that was the catalyst for getting to that next level. So fast forward 7 years in the business now, we have an international reputation in the board services space. We have partnerships with company, and organizations like the New York Stock Exchange. I have a team nationwide. There's about 12 of us that all focus on working with senior leaders through their executive job search or their board search. And so, what started as an online resume writing as a freelancer has really morphed into working with VP to board level candidates to help them prepare for and navigate their high level searches. And that's been so rewarding. It's a group of people that really love their work and love working with the candidates.
That's fantastic. So it's making an impact on them. Thank you for sharing that. So the big piece for us, we hear about boards all the time and board members. And I love the phrase that you had when we initially talked about helping people become board ready.
Yes.
Dive into that a little bit. What does it mean to be board ready?
Wow. Yeah. It's something that comes up all the time where senior leaders will, have, typically a C-level role. A lot of CEOs, CFOs, things like that will think about, okay, what, could I get a board role? And what does that look like? And what does that process look like? And yes, getting board ready is a really important piece of that. And it's a couple things. It's having the table stakes, which is the senior level leadership. You've been at the table. You understand what that looks like. You have usually at least 15 years of leadership experience. You've got to have some time in the game too. An area, either deep functional expertise or deep industry expertise, right? So you may go real deep in one industry or really deep in a function. Either of those things are helpful. And then understanding, the other piece that you need then is the understanding corporate governance. I think that's a lot of the piece that sometimes people are missing, and then they get into the room and they realize, oh, there's a lot of pieces around governance that would help with the interview process for board seats, help with understanding kind of their role if they get a seat, what that looks like. So there's a lot of programs around preparing people for board seats around board governance. So there's a lot of different options. Private Directors Association is one that's low cost. NACD is kind of the gold standard that some people do. So it's not necessarily that you have to have a certification, because I get that question a lot, but it's really around have you done some professional development to understand the vocabulary and purpose of board governance.
That's very informative. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some of those opportunities that are there to establish that corporate governance piece, because I'm sure that's the one thing that most people are missing. Versus the deep technical knowledge or just the experience at the corporate level, higher levels. It's interesting to me, what do you see as you're working with these individuals that want to be on boards? What do you see that's driving them to want to join a board?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There's a couple things, and it depends on the person, right? So a lot of our clients that come to us that say, there's a couple different ways they come to us and say, I'm really looking for board work. And it can be that they are preparing for retirement in the next 5 to 10 years and want to kind of soft launch into retirement, right? So they want to get a couple of board seats so that they're not just completely shutting off their career. It's people that are at retirement now and thinking about, okay, I don't want to lose my network. I want to use my brain. I want to still help companies do great work, but I want to also have a lot more flexibility. And so they'll look at board work as a way to stay relevant and active in their industry or their function without necessarily having to take on that full-time responsibility. Some people want it for income. I mean, corporate board seats that are for, that are paid opportunities can be pretty lucrative. So some people really do want, that income, which is great. And And honestly, some of it is, it's hard, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners may feel this way. I don't know about you, but the thought of retirement is scarier to me than the thought of working for the rest of my life.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that is the case for a lot of our clients too, and a lot of senior leaders, executives. You've built this amazing career. You're a high achiever. You're always going for the next thing, and so the thought of just fading off onto the golf course is terrifying. I know it is for me, and so that's a lot of the driver for people as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm noticing something you didn't say. Are you getting much of like those mid-career people? They've got that 15 to 20 years. They may be 45 to 50 years old, where they've got 15 years of life left. They're not thinking retirement yet, but yet they've got some rich experience. They actually want to give through their service to a board as well as learn in their service to a board. Are you finding much of that mid-career? And if so, where are they coming from? If not, why not?
Right. No, that's so I'm so glad you brought it up because yes, we are seeing that mid-career now, mid like leadership career. They still kind of have to have that deep functional or industry expertise, but the thing that I say to them is if you're not necessarily board ready for getting a seat on a paid board opportunity, then in that mid-career space, a really great opportunity is advisory boards. Working with an earlier stage company or a smaller company that may not have a formal board, but wants that needs some expertise in some area. There's less there's less process around how to get on an advisory board. There's less compensation. It's usually more of an equity situation. If it's paid at all, but at least it starts giving you that experience. You're able to give back. You're able to use your expertise. You're growing your network, and getting some of those advisory seats are a really great way to get board ready to then get the paid seats. So sometimes if you don't necessarily hit all of the perfect markers for a board candidate at the paid seat space, then advisory board seats are much more low hanging fruit for people in that mid-career space.
Yeah, I like that. And it's kind of like the whole corporate ladder, right? You got to serve your time a little bit, take the advisory positions that may or may not pay, but get the experience so you can get in something else that's much more lucrative and beneficial to a larger corp. I like that a lot. So when we are coaching leaders, we coach a lot of officers and organizations, and they have a board that they report to. And it's very, very common for us to have rich and honestly just difficult conversations, because oftentimes the relationship between the officers, the CEO, and the board are not that great. Mm-hmm. And so I want you to put on the hat for a second. We're going to flip these hats, but for right now, let's put on the hat of the CEO. Right. And they're struggling with their board. What tips would you give them to navigate that relationship more effectively?
Yeah, this can be so hard. And I know it's an issue for a lot of CEOs, wondering, if they're reporting to board, either they're new in the role or maybe board leadership has changed and they're not really meshing. I think there's a couple things that are really important to think about, especially in a formal board setting, not the advisory board setting. The board has fiduciary responsibility for the company, right? They have a stake in the game. Yeah. And so I think remembering everyone's motivations are really helpful, and remembering that the board is there for the success and the long-term sustainability of the company, and the CEO should be too. But sometimes those competing priorities of today versus long-term can be combative. And so I think remembering the motivations of the board in general, and then really I see a lot of CEOs either talk about the board as more adversarial, or I'll have to take this to the board, or, I'll have to present to the board. And I think really more thinking about your board as your partners in the success of the business, and remembering that they're there to help build the business as well. And so calling on them more often, maybe not just showing up in the quarterly board meetings, but, calling your board chair, reaching out for advice, reaching out for, hey, this is going on. How would you handle it? Or I wanted to keep you apprised of such and such across all the board members. Help give those little touch points that instill trust in your work, rather than just the giant board, presentation that you give quarterly. And I think those touch points of trust and relationship building are incredibly crucial to a strong board working relationship.
Absolutely. I like that. A phrase we use all the time is that there is no trust outside of relationship.
Hmm.
We have to go after those and encourage those and develop it for our benefit. Okay, let's flip hats for a moment. Let's say you're a board chair, for instance, who's working directly with the CEO. The relationship's not going well. What tips would you have for that board member to work more effectively with the CEO?
That is such a great question. So I think, at the board member level, you have a little bit more, you have more resources at your disposal, right? You can suggest more options. And I would say if there's an issue with CEO and the board member, and maybe it's the whole board, maybe it's a couple members on the board, maybe there's some relationship or some personality conflicts, things like that. I do think it's important to bring in a third party and have a board consultant come in or do a retreat or do some sort of a um, get another perspective in the room, because I think sometimes it can get really personal, especially if there's personality conflicts and things like that. And so if you get a third party in the room to kind of mediate that and set clear expectations and set goals and have everybody on the same page, I think sometimes having somebody else come in helps relieve some of the tensions.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. What's interesting about that, sometimes the most brilliant things are like incredibly simple.
Right.
But if you think about the CEO and the board members used to be in leadership, right? So they know what the corporate side of it is. When we are developing our leadership team, the officers, the VPs, things like that, we will usually bring people in to lead us through leadership stuff and difficult conversations and productive conflict. But yet it seems like one of the things we forget with maybe just as important a leadership team is the board
Mm-hmm.
and the CEO and how that plays out. So I like that concept of basically treating them the same way, right? Our
Yeah.
officer team, we're going to develop one another. We're going to have the relationships. We're going to bring in outside sources. Same thing with the board team, working with those officers.
Yeah, I'm a
So,
huge fan of outside sources. I mean, even in a business our size, we're still a small business, but I spend a lot of time and money, frankly, on professional development and coaching for our team and for
mhm,
myself. And that was one of the things that leveled my business up, was getting, seeking out an executive leadership coach for myself, of saying, okay, my team isn't going to tell me what I suck at. What are my blind spots? Where can I get out of my own way? Where can I level up? And I think the more you do that, the more you still need it, right? And once you get into that board and CEO level, you're so bogged down in the day-to-day pressures, and you forget some of those simple things
mhm.
of, okay, clear communication, and all the things we've learned. I think those, they can get forgotten. And I don't think that coaching is just stuck in one level of your career. I think bringing in someone benefits every level.
Absolutely. I agree. And I even, I am a coach. So obviously I believe in that. But at the same time, I think coaches need coaches because we're
100.
still developing things in different ways. So let's transition for a second to your company as you were just talking about that. So I know you said it was your side gig. It's now been your full time gig for about 7 years. It was you and your husband 7 years ago initially. Same with my wife and I. It was just us at the beginning.
Oh,
You
I
now
love
have
that.
12 people around the country. You've expanded your services. You've used some coaches and other advisors to help you along the way. We have a lot of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs that listen to this podcast. A lot of solopreneurs don't necessarily want to be a solopreneur.
Hmm.
They just don't know what to do to take those next steps to actually hire that first person and scale the business. And so just share with us for a minute, like that first time you're like, we got to bring in somebody else. And how did you
Right.
know it was time? What did you want them to do? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I have a great story about this, actually, because I was a solopreneur. I didn't necessarily want to be a solopreneur. I didn't set up to start a business. And then, when you start a business, I'm sure a lot of the solopreneurs in this, listening, all of your listeners are thinking, oh yeah, and you have to do all of the things. Like, I was a great resume writer. I love working with clients. I'm not a numbers person. I didn't like
Mhm.
doing the accounting. I ended up, because we built a business so quickly and didn't anticipate building a business, there's a lot of like backwards rework we had to do to clean
Mm,
things up, to get it organized, to get systems and all of these things. So fast forward about 2 years into the journey, work is going well, but I hit a wall. I couldn't grow any further without bringing on more people. But I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, I could bring on more resume writers, and that would that would immediately add to revenue, but then we needed structure and I needed operations, and I thought, but if I brought operations, I can get really organized and then be able to scale more efficiently. And so kind of went back and forth on this, and we decided operations. And I would say to any business owner that first hire being operations was a game changer for us. It was huge. I was able then to really focus on the work that I do best, and let go of a lot of the things that I am not great at, right? I'm not, in fact, the woman who leads our operations would probably give you a whole list of things I am not amazing at.
Exactly.
And so I actually got really, really lucky because it was, I would say, probably early COVID. I got to this wall point where I thought, okay, I'm doing okay, but what could we be if I could scale, and how do I scale? And I can't really afford to bring someone on until I scale, but I can't scale until I bring someone on, right? Chicken and an egg.
Yep.
And I had a client who had a corporate career, corporate leadership career, and then built her own business, and then sold that business. It was a local grocery store, like specialty grocer, sold that business. And then I met her because she came to me because she was starting to look for her next thing. And she was moving cross country. And she said, when she came to me as a client, she said, I don't necessarily have to work, but I want to work. I want to stay, involved. I want to work from home before work from home was everywhere. And she's like, I don't know what I want. I want to stay busy, but I don't necessarily need all of the things I always had in my last place. So when I had this opportunity come up, I thought, I need an adult in the room to help guide me because I'm not, naturally the business person, right? So I reached out to her, and I will never forget because I sent her an email. She had been a client like 6 months prior, so it had been a while, but I remembered her and her skills and all these things. And I sent her an email and I said, hey, I don't know if you're still looking for work, but I need someone to help me build out my operations. And I have a job that I don't know what the job is, what it pays, or how many hours it's going to be. But do you want to come do this thing with me? And her response in all caps was, hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that's the energy I need. I need that energy. We'll figure the rest out. And she's still with me, and it's been great. And we've grown together and scaled the business. So it's been amazing.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks for sharing that story. What I really like towards the end of that, because we've been down the same path, so many people hesitate to pull the trigger because they think they have to have it well articulated, right? Full job description, what it's going to be, how many hours it's going to be. But that's not the reality of small business. The reality of small business is we get to just constantly agile, pivoting, where's it going to come? And so when we hired our first full-time person, we've had a lot of contractors, and we still have a lot of contractors.
Yeah.
But when we hired our first full-time employee, we talked to him, same thing as you, about the job description, what it could be. And I was literally like, but I don't know.
Right.
When I hired my EA, we're okay, we're looking at like probably 5 hours a week, and we'll start with this, but I don't know.
Right.
But it grows with them. And it actually, I think, enhances the relationship because it allows them to see what they can do and say, can I? And it allows us to see more opportunities that are there to say, will you?
Right.
And it forms a great relationship because it's just all about that communication.
Yeah. And that's so true. That's exactly how it's gone through of, she hopped in and she had never done, she was not from our industry. She had never done a remote role. And she's on the other side of the country, and it has, we built it together, and it was fine, but you have to be agile and okay with change and okay with constantly iterating. And I think about the business where it was then and where we are today. We joke that we're at D&S 3.0, right? We've gone through major iterations of the business over the years.
Yeah. So odd question for you, because you were in career search, resume writing, you understand all of that. Was it more difficult to hire people because you're kind of like, I know how this thing works?
That's funny. No, because I'm probably not the typical, I don't do a ton of here's a job description and come, apply, and we go through the whole process. I actually am more about always thinking about recruiting and always thinking about who's next on our team. And so I'm really active in our industry, or professional development organizations. I'm really active in going to conferences, meeting the resume writers and the coaches in our industry who are doing the best work. And that way, when we have a spot open, I already have an idea of who I want to reach out to. So I do more of an active recruiting model than I do a job opening model, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that's the way of small business. We're in the same boat. always looking ahead. And by the way, for listeners, part of the reason she was able to look ahead and think ahead and go to those conferences is because she brought in the ops person.
100%.
We have to do things that only she could do, right? And we've done the same thing. And yes, we knew like this year in 2024, we knew that in Q1 we were going to bring in 4 or 5 new contract coaches.
Wow.
I knew where I was going before I started.
Right.
From developing relationships and talking to people, and even talking to coaches that had other contract coaches, and who do you have that's looking for more work and things like that. And so, and then even developing your own people. All of our employees started out as contractors.
Yeah, most of ours did too.
Yeah.
And in our industry, that's common, right? But then when you think of it, okay, now you have a full-time role open, who works well with you, who's behind your mission, who does great work for the clients, and then it's easy to know who's coming on next.
Yeah, but I think it's an important piece because there's a lot of people who want to make a change and they're afraid to become a contractor or a subcontractor for 3 or 4 companies at once to make ends meet. They don't want to do that. They want, quote unquote, the security of a full-time job.
Right.
But there are a ton of small businesses that use the contractor route to find their employees. It's an avenue.
And the contractor route was a big deal for me when I took the leap into doing this full time. I did have a couple of contract relationships where I was a subcontractor for other companies like ours because it gave me enough regular income to know that I could build the company and not eat cat food, right? And so it gave me enough. Although I don't have a cat, I've been told cat food is more expensive. I don't know, but it gave me that a little bit more. Like reliability in my income. And I think sometimes people don't want to do that because they want to do their own thing. Or, if you're going to jump into entrepreneurship, you have to build the whole plane by yourself. And I feel like you can partner. And that's where we've been really successful, is partnering with other organizations, even if they seem like competitors on paper. You don't have to do everything alone.
No. Yeah. Partnership. I use the phrase strategic alliances.
Yeah. I love that.
Strategic alliances in the sense that there's a benefit to them, there's a benefit to us, and those benefits aren't the same thing.
Right.
But it's mutually beneficial, so it's worth having that strategic alliance and developing things because we never get anywhere by ourselves. So
we don't.
That's awesome. Well, Debra, it's been great talking to you today. We finish every episode with the same question, so I want to ask you that question. What is something our listeners can do intentionally today to lead more effectively?
Wow. Okay. I love that question. And I think I would say this, when we talk about leading more effectively in my space of working with people that are building their careers, even at the highest levels, we work with CEOs of large companies who, if they leave their job for whatever reason, they'll come to us and say they don't know what they want next. And I think having a real clear picture of where you're headed helps you make all of those other decisions, right? So whether it's in your company or whether you're starting a job search or whether you're thinking about moving into board service and you want to lead, through board service, it's being really clear about where you do your best work, who you're uniquely equipped to serve, and what you want your career or company to look like. Because if you're really clear about those things, then all of the decisions that come after that are easy. But if you're not intentionally managing your career or your business or the direction of your board search or all of these things, then it's just haphazard and it's happening to you instead of you driving intentionally into the direction you want to go.
I love it. That's the definition of intention, right? Taking it on as we go. Awesome. Well, thank you for being a guest today, Debra. For our listeners, you'll find in our show notes links and how you can reach out to her and to her company, D&S Executive Career Management. If you have any of those issues you want to tap into, I'd encourage you to reach out to her. Thank you very much, and we pray that your business keeps on growing and having an impact.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Reenergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.